don't block the path of inquiry. Don't lay down rules that make it impossible for people to ask important questions.
Welcome to the Thought Stretchers podcast, where we hope to stretch your thinking about important issues in education through rich inquiry. My name is Drew Perkins, and I'm your host for these conversations for complexity and nuance. In this episode, I'm continuing my experimentation with artificial intelligence. What you'll hear are two different audio files created by AI using a blog piece that you can find on WeGrowTeachers.com. That blog piece is titled 4 Ways School Leaders Can Navigate Culture War Issues, and we'll put that in the show notes. And it was originally published in the October 2024 Principal Leadership Quarterly, which is a magazine put out by the NASSP, National Association of Secondary School Principals. The first audio file is about 10 minutes long. It was created using an AI tool called 11 Labs. You can find them at 11labs.io. And it is strictly a reading of the blog piece, which is an interesting way to consume this content. What follows is a conversation between two AI voices using that same blog content, and that's about 25 minutes long, where the AI voices have a conversation about that. And again, a very interesting way to think about the content and get you to think about the content. This AI-generated conversation was generated using Notebook LM, which can be found at notebooklm.google.com, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. This is the tool that I used to create the previously AI-generated podcast conversation that I mentioned earlier. Speaking of that previous podcast, which was AI-generated, the title of which is How to Make Inquiry-Based Learning Knowledge Rich, and I published that on December 2nd, where I took one of our other blog pieces and asked Notebook LM to turn it into a podcast conversation. I got some really interesting responses, and I appreciate that. It's always interesting to hear from listeners, and these AI-generated products, I think, really are thought-provoking and perhaps thought-stretching. That one was not perfect, nor is this one. My attempts at having my own voice cloned by any of these AI tools and then use it to read the blog pieces wasn't very successful. It did clone my voice very accurately, but the reading did not seem natural, and that to me is a deal breaker. Again, there's so many questions that AI-generated content raises in my mind. I'd love to hear some of those questions for you. And we'll post it on our Thought Stretchers community, which you can find at thoughtstretchers.org if you'd like to comment there, or you can email me at drew@thoughtstretchers.org. As always, I encourage you to take a look at our professional development, professional learning options. You can find those at WeGrowTeachers.com. All of our professional learning is through the lens of inquiry. We do a lot of project-based learning work and differentiated instruction work and inquiry teaching and learning, but other things, including two things that are germane to this podcast, which are objective pluralism to help schools navigate culture war issues, and AI in education, which of course this is an example of. As you think about professional learning and how to help students better prepare for the modern world, please find us at WeGrowTeachers.com or email me at drew@thoughtstretchers.org with comments, questions, concerns, ideas, or anything else. And now here is that podcast, first of which is the reading of the blog piece, which is about 10 minutes, or if you'd like to fast forward past that to the AI-generated conversation, it's about 25 minutes and probably about 12 minutes into this overall podcast after the introduction and the 10 minutes of the reading.
4 Ways School Leaders Can Navigate Culture War Issues. Polarizing culture war issues. 4 ways school leaders can navigate them and strengthen our democracy. Originally published in the October 2024 Principal Leadership Quarterly. By Drew Perkins, Director of Thought Stretchers Education. It's no secret that toxic polarization is encroaching on our K-12 education spaces. News and social media are increasingly populated with stories from boardrooms to classrooms where tempers are flaring and rhetoric is heated. Secondary school principals are uniquely positioned to receive pressure from any and all stakeholders in their school's ecosystem, but also have an opportunity to lead their communities in transcending these corrosive elements. Here are 4 ways secondary school principals can navigate polarizing culture war issues that have become increasingly likely to tear their communities apart. 1. Use objective pluralism to teach the truth. Objective pluralism is an approach to teaching and learning that leans into liberal principles from the Enlightenment and that undergird America's democracy and Western democracies. Pluralism promotes the idea that diversity is not only inevitable, but also valuable, contributing to a richer and more dynamic community. The goal of pluralism is often to foster tolerance, understanding, and cooperation among different groups, facilitating peaceful coexistence despite differences. In a pluralistic society, different individuals and groups can maintain their distinct identities and contribute to the overall social fabric. Being objective means approaching a situation, issue, or information without being unduly influenced by personal feelings, biases, or opinions. It involves the ability to set them aside and then analyze and evaluate them based on evidence. In various contexts, objectivity can be crucial. For example, in journalism, reporters not to be confused with opinion, journalists often strive to present news stories objectively, providing an unbiased account of events. In scientific research, objectivity is essential to maintain the integrity of experiments and draw accurate conclusions so scientists can follow the evidence regardless of how it might conflict with their desired outcomes. Of course, achieving complete objectivity can be challenging, as individuals may carry unconscious biases or be influenced by personal experiences. Regardless, the pursuit of objectivity involves working to consciously minimize these influences and prioritizing a rational and evidence-based approach. Objective pluralism, then, in the context of teachings and learning, is an approach that recognizes the existence and value of a variety of viewpoints, perspectives, ideas, and opinions, but also acknowledges and advocates for accepted knowledge and truth, as determined through the principles of Enlightenment liberalism. When engaging in planning, teaching, and curriculum design, educators should be cognizant of the intentional and intuitive components. The former involves the specific planning and lesson design steps to be built into teaching and learning. The latter involves the teachable moments that arise from effective intentional lesson design. By leveraging their perception, educators can reinforce and model the core rules and practices in their lesson delivery. This approach is consistent with the knowledge-rich inquiry teaching approach that helps teachers build surface, deep, and transfer learning. 2. Educate your school community on the 2 core rules and 10 commitments of Enlightenment liberalism. For the points on Enlightenment liberalism and free thought that I make here and in No. 3. I've drawn from Jonathan Rauch's book, The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. As Rauch makes clear, one purpose of K-12 education in the United States is to support our democracy by graduating productive and civically engaged students. Through my work with schools to help them navigate cultural polarization, it has become clear most educators and stakeholders are only vaguely familiar with the concepts of Enlightenment liberalism, not to be confused with liberal as commonly used when referring to the Democratic Party or the partisan left. Why would they be? They're busy living their lives and doing their jobs. But when we present these concepts in our objective pluralism workshops, they resonate with most people because they recognize them as necessary to foster a functioning democracy and reality-based community. Enlightenment liberalism is guided by these 2 core rules. The fallibilist rule: no one gets the final say. You may claim that a statement is established as knowledge only if it can be debunked in principle, and only insofar as it withstands attempts to debunk it. The empirical rule: no one has personal authority. You may claim that a statement has been established as knowledge only insofar as the method to check it gives the same result regardless of the identity of the checker and regardless of the source of the statement. And these 10 commitments: fallibilism. The ethos that any of us might be wrong, thus we strive to keep our ideas open to criticism. Objectivity. Understanding that truth is not based on feeling, identity, or a person's, group's lived experience. Exclusivity. A commitment to the idea of objective reality, because what lies beyond that is chaos. Disconfirmation. A commitment that all ideas and viewpoints are subject to challenge by the community. Accountability. A commitment to offering our ideas for critique in good faith and acknowledging when we're wrong. Pluralism. Valuing viewpoint diversity and a commitment to encourage and seek it out. Civility. A commitment to discourage and avoid personal attacks and instead depersonalize rhetoric. Professionalism, a commitment to valuing the credentials and reputations of this reality-based community. Institutionalism, a commitment to valuing and relying upon established norms and codes of conduct. No bullshitting, a commitment to sincerely regard the truth instead of obscuring it. 3. Help teachers and students understand the 3 challenges to free thought. The First Amendment to our Constitution protects our freedom of speech and expression, and while laws and policies are necessary, they are not sufficient. Forces from both the left and the right engage in illiberal activism and actions meant to control thought and expression. Our schools should be a significant part of reinforcing the culture necessary to resist those forces. While these 3 challenges to free expression can be emotionally seductive, teachers and students should understand how they actually undermine social progress by limiting speech and expression that helps us correct injustices. The fundamentalist threat. The idea that we, or I, know what the truth is, so we don't need to take seriously anyone who disagrees. Why would we allow untruths to be propagated in the world? The egalitarian threat. Grounded in fairness, the idea that everyone should be treated equally so, whatever anyone thinks can be true because, after all, we all have different points of view. Or that the beliefs of persons in historically oppressed classes or groups should be prioritized. The humanitarian threat. Grounded in harm, the claim that someone else's ideas can hurt me or my group in a way that is akin to violence, so expressing them or tolerating them violates my human rights. 4th, actively work with students to dispel the following 3 great untruths as identified by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind. How good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. We want our students to be anti-fragile, as Haidt says, and to understand that they can do hard things and will grow by doing them. Always trust your feelings. We want our students to be careful not to act or react impulsively based on their emotional interpretations of events, but to question those feelings and lean into rational decision-making. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. We want our students to resist the kind of black and white thinking tribalism that creates the dangerous and destructive us versus them dynamic we're all familiar with. Prioritizing group identity reinforces polarization, and we want our students to recognize and value the complexity and nuance of every individual. As social psychologist Jonathan Haidt says, children are anti-fragile. We are all prone to motivated reasoning and confirmation bias, and we're all prone to tribalism and black and white thinking. If we want to raise a generation of kids who can deal with diversity of all kinds, who can go out into a world that's physically actually quite safe and yet full of offensive content, we need to get our educational practices in line with these 3 psychological principles. Growing emotionally healthy students requires building resiliency that empowers them to encounter different or disagreeable ideas with the same sense of curiosity and tolerance we should expect of adults. K-12. Education is clearly at the center of our polarized, increasingly toxic culture wars. Leaning into the Enlightenment liberal principles that undergird our democracy and moving away from the illiberal authoritarianism encroaching from both left and right can help your school community move toward a more healthy culture where students and adults can focus on teaching and learning. Most of your community is likely motivated to move beyond the us-v. Them mindset, but it will take leadership to galvanize positive collective action. Developing a better understanding of objective pluralism and using it as part of a knowledge-rich inquiry teaching approach helps prepare educators to engage learners in ways that grow surface, deep, and transfer learning while modeling and instilling the Enlightenment liberal principles that foster productive dialogue and navigation of conflict. To that end, teaching must honor and recognize the incredible diversity of the human experience and discard the dogma and orthodoxy that many feel compelled to engage in because they feel they must pick a side. We can acknowledge the complexity and nuance of contentious topics and allow for a plurality of perspectives while not letting go of accepted truth. Doing so will feel like a breath of fresh air for your school community and empower you to better prepare students for the modern world.
Welcome to your deep dive. We had to get into this one. You sent over this article from Principal Leadership Magazine.
Oh, yeah.
It's about how school leaders can handle the culture wars that are impacting education.
It's a hot topic.
Yeah. And honestly, it's something I think every educator is grappling with these days.
Yeah, it's especially when you're on the front lines, right?
Right.
Trying to foster a learning environment
Yeah.
where all students feel safe and respected, but also dealing with these incredibly divisive issues.
Exactly. It's like, how do we even approach this?
Yeah.
And this article dives right into a concept that I think is key to striking that balance. That's objective pluralism. And what's fascinating to me is how this idea can actually help us be more open to different viewpoints, not less.
It is interesting, right? It's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But the author, Drew Perkins,
Right.
argues that it's about acknowledging the value of diverse perspectives while also holding on to the idea that there is such a thing as objective truth.
Okay, so it's not just a free-for-all, where all opinions are equal.
Exactly.
But rather, it's about creating a space where we can explore different viewpoints while grounding ourselves in facts and evidence.
Precisely. Like, think of it like a courtroom. You have lawyers presenting different sides of a case.
Right.
But ultimately, there's a judge who's there to ensure that the arguments are based on evidence and legal precedent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that.
Yeah.
Perkins connects this idea of objective pluralism to the principles of Enlightenment liberalism,
Right.
which, to be honest, sounded a bit intimidating at first.
I hear you.
Yeah.
But it boils down to two core rules that are actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And I'd argue essential for a functioning democracy, let alone a classroom.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack those rules.
Okay.
What's the first one?
The first rule is that no one gets the final say.
Oh,
All knowledge can be challenged and tested.
okay.
Perkins calls this the fallibilist rule.
Okay, the fallibilist rule.
Yay.
So it's like saying that even the most established facts can be questioned and re-examined as new evidence emerges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this applies to everything.
Interesting.
From scientific theories to historical interpretations to, yes, even our own deeply held beliefs.
Right.
It's about fostering intellectual humility
Yeah.
and a willingness to be proven wrong.
Which is hard.
It is hard.
Yeah, very hard.
Especially in a culture where people are often so entrenched in their own viewpoints.
Exactly, and that's where the second rule comes in,
Right.
the empirical rule.
Empirical rule.
This one states that no one has special authority.
Okay.
Truth is based on evidence, not on who says it.
So it's not about blindly accepting what someone in a position of authority tells you,
Right.
but rather it's about critically evaluating the evidence for yourself.
Right. And this is so relevant in education.
Yes.
Think about how often you might encounter a parent who insists their child deserves an exception to a rule.
Or a colleague who claims their teaching method is superior
Oh, yeah.
without any evidence to back it up.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, that actually connects to something I've been wrestling with lately.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
We're trying to implement a new reading program at our school, and there's some pushback from teachers who've been using the same approach for years.
Oh, yeah.
That's-
like
It's tough. It's tough to navigate those conversations
it is.
when people are resistant to change, even when the research supports it.
It's definitely a challenge. And I think that's where these principles of Enlightenment liberalism can really help us as educators.
Okay.
It's about creating a culture where we value evidence over opinion,
Uh-huh.
where we're willing to challenge our own assumptions, and where we're open to learning from each other.
That's a tall order, but it sounds like a worthy goal.
It is.
Yeah. And Perkins goes even further,
He does.
outlining 10 commitments of Enlightenment liberalism.
Yes.
It's kind of like a code of conduct
Right.
for a society that values truth and open debate.
It's almost like a roadmap
Yeah.
for navigating these tricky waters.
I like that.
Yeah, and what's interesting
Yeah.
is that these commitments can be applied not just to society as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
but also to the microcosm of the classroom.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah,
What are some of these commitments,
right.
and how might they play out in a school setting?
Well, we've already touched on the first two,
Okay.
fallibilism and empiricism.
Right.
But there's also a commitment to disconfirmation,
Disconfirmation.
which means that all ideas should be open to challenge,
Oh.
regardless of where they come from.
So it's not about shutting down dissenting voices, but rather encouraging respectful debate and critical analysis, even of ideas that might feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. And this connects to another commitment,
Okay.
accountability.
Accountability.
Being willing to admit when you're wrong,
Right.
and even more importantly, changing your mind
Okay.
when presented with new evidence.
Yeah. Now, I have to admit that one can be tough,
It is.
especially for teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, we're supposed to be the experts, right?
Right.
But I think modeling that kind of intellectual humility is so important for our students.
It really is. And it shows them that learning is a lifelong process.
Yeah.
And that even the experts can make mistakes and evolve their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a culture of intellectual safety where it's okay to be wrong as long as you're willing to learn and grow.
That's such a valuable lesson, and one that I think is often missing.
I agree.
In our current climate of polarization and outrage.
Right.
So we've covered fallibilism,
Right.
empiricism, disconfirmation,
Yeah.
and accountability. What other commitments are on this list?
Well, there's pluralism itself, which we've been discussing.
Yes.
Valuing a diversity of viewpoints
Right.
and creating space for those voices to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
There's civility, which is essential for maintaining respectful dialogue, even when disagreements arise.
Yes, I always think of that. I always think of it like, like institutionalism, like the agreed upon rules of the game, for a sports match.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because without it, things get chaotic.
Absolutely.
People get hurt, nobody learns anything.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And then there's professionalism, which means maintaining a certain level of decorum
Okay.
and focusing on the substance of the arguments rather than resorting to personal attacks.
And no bullshitting.
Right.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, a commitment to sincerity and honesty,
Right.
to seeking truth rather than obscuring it or trying to manipulate others with emotional appeals or misinformation.
Oh, you know what? This
Yeah.
no bullshitting commitment
Yeah.
really resonates with me.
Yeah.
I've definitely encountered situations, both with parents and colleagues, where it feels like people are more interested in winning the argument than in having an honest conversation.
I think we all have.
Yeah.
And seeking the truth.
And that's why Perkins argues that these commitments are so essential.
Not just for education,
Mm-hmm.
but for a healthy society.
Right.
If we can't engage in reasoned debate,
Yes.
if we're not willing to listen to opposing viewpoints,
Right.
if we prioritize our own egos over the pursuit of truth,
Right.
then we're in trouble.
That's a sobering thought,
Yeah,
but it also feels empowering in a way.
I agree.
Because it means that we as educators have a crucial role to play
Right.
in fostering these values
Right.
in the next generation.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this article.
Okay.
The threats that Perkins identifies to this kind of thinking.
Okay.
These are forces that are actively working against these principles of Enlightenment liberalism.
Okay.
And they can come from both the left and the right.
Okay, now that's something I'm really interested in exploring.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I have a feeling this is where things get really relevant
right.
to the challenges we're facing in education today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's dive into those threats next and see how they might be playing out in your own school and community.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's go.
All right, so let's dive into those threats to Enlightenment liberalism
Okay.
that Perkins outlines in the article. I'm ready to get a little uncomfortable.
Well, brace yourself because he doesn't hold back.
Okay.
The first threat he calls the fundamentalist threat.
Okay.
And it's something I'm sure you've encountered in some form or another.
I have a feeling I know where this is going.
It's the idea that your group, whether it's your political party, your religious community, or even your preferred teaching methodology, has the absolute truth.
Oh.
And there's no need to listen to anyone else.
Oof, yeah. Talk about shutting down dialogue.
Yeah.
It's like those folks who show up at school board meetings with a predetermined script
Right.
and refuse to actually listen to opposing viewpoints.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example. And it's something we see playing out in classrooms, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Think about those times a student might shut down a conversation by saying, well, that's just how it is.
Right.
Or my family believes this, so it must be true.
It can be really tough to break through that kind of thinking,
Right.
especially when it's rooted in deeply held beliefs.
It is.
So what's the second threat Perkins identifies?
He calls it the egalitarian threat.
Egalitarian threat. Okay.
And in a way, it comes from a good place.
Okay.
A desire for fairness and equality.
Right.
But the problem arises when it leads to the belief that all viewpoints are equally valid.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Simply because everyone deserves to be treated fairly.
I see the danger there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying that a student's understanding of gravity
Right.
is just as valid as a physicist's,
Exactly.
simply because everyone's opinion deserves respect.
And while it's crucial to create a classroom where everyone feels safe to share their thoughts,
Yes.
we also have a responsibility to guide students towards a discerning understanding of truth and evidence.
Right.
Not all opinions are created equal,
Right.
especially when it comes to facts and evidence.
So how do we strike that balance?
Right.
How do we foster respect for individual perspectives while also upholding the importance of objective truth?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's where objective pluralism comes in
Right.
as a guiding principle.
Okay.
It's about creating a classroom culture
Yeah.
where we acknowledge the value of diverse viewpoints,
Yeah.
but also maintain a commitment to seeking evidence, evaluating arguments, and ultimately striving for truth, even if it's elusive.
That makes a lot of sense, but I can also see how it could be a tricky tightrope to walk,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
especially in the midst of these heated cultural debates.
For sure. And that's why Perkins emphasizes the importance of clear communication, transparency,
Yes.
and a willingness to engage in dialogue with parents and community members,
Right.
even those who might hold very different views.
Okay, let's talk about that third threat. I'm sensing a theme here.
This one is called the humanitarian threat.
Okay, humanitarian threat.
And it arises from a well-intentioned desire
To protect people from harm.
Mm-hmm.
However, it becomes problematic when it leads to the censorship of certain ideas.
So the intention is good, but the method is.
Potentially stifling to open dialogue and critical thinking. Yes.
Okay.
It's like creating a culture of fear where people are afraid to express their opinions or ask challenging questions
Right.
for fear of being labeled as insensitive or intolerant.
You know, that makes me think about those safe space initiatives that have been popping up on college campuses.
Right.
While the intention is to create an environment free from harassment and discrimination, I worry that sometimes they can inadvertently create echo chambers where certain viewpoints are silenced.
That's a valid concern, and it's something we need to be mindful of in schools as well.
Right.
The goal is to create an inclusive and respectful learning environment,
Yes.
but not at the expense of open inquiry and the free exchange of ideas.
Right. So essentially, Perkins is arguing that we need to be aware of these three threats.
Fundamentalism, egalitarianism, taken to extremes, and humanitarianism that morphs into censorship, and actively push back against them if we want to maintain a society where open dialogue and critical thinking can thrive.
Exactly. And he sees education as being on the front lines of this battle.
Yes.
He believes that schools have a crucial role to play
Yeah.
in fostering the values and skills necessary to navigate these complex cultural waters.
You know, it's interesting how these threats connect to the three great untruths.
Right.
They were outlined in the Coddling of the American Mind.
Yes.
It's like they create a culture of fragility, fear, and division, making it even harder to engage in these difficult conversations.
That's a great connection. And those untruths, the idea that hardship makes you weaker, that feelings are always right, and that the world is divided into good and evil, are rampant in our culture.
They really are. I see it all the time.
Me too.
In social media, in the news, even in casual conversations.
Everywhere.
Yeah, and I think they're especially harmful to young people.
Absolutely. Who are still developing their sense of self and their understanding of the world.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why it's so important for us as educators to provide a counter-narrative.
Yes.
To teach students how to be resilient in the face of challenges, to think critically about their own emotions and the emotions of others.
Right.
And to recognize the nuance and complexity in every individual and situation.
So it's not just about teaching content. It's about teaching kids how to think.
Exactly.
How to engage with the world in a thoughtful, nuanced, and compassionate way.
Precisely. And the good news is that Perkins doesn't just leave us hanging
Oh, good.
with these big abstract ideas.
Okay.
He also offers some very practical strategies
Okay.
for how to put objective pluralism into practice in the classroom.
Now, that's what I'm eager to hear about. Because I think many educators are probably feeling overwhelmed, a bit unsure about how to actually navigate these challenges.
Right.
So give us some concrete tools. Absolutely. One of the key ideas is to embrace objective pluralism as a teaching philosophy.
Okay.
It's about creating a classroom where diverse viewpoints are welcomed and explored, but always within the framework of seeking objective truth.
Okay, so it's not just a free-for-all of opinions. It's a structured inquiry guided by facts, evidence, and critical thinking.
You got it. It's about creating a classroom where students are encouraged to ask questions,
Okay.
challenge assumptions, and consider different perspectives, all while grounding their arguments in evidence and logic.
That sounds great in theory,
It does.
but I have to admit I'm a little nervous about how it would play out in practice.
I hear you.
What if a student brings up a viewpoint that's blatantly offensive or harmful?
Right.
Where do you draw the line?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And it's one that Perkins addresses head on.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of establishing clear ground rules for discussion.
Right.
Rules that emphasize respect, open-mindedness, and a focus on evidence-based arguments.
So it's like setting the stage for a productive conversation from the get-go.
Yes.
Letting students know that it's okay to disagree, but it needs to be done respectfully and with a commitment to seeking truth.
Exactly. And it's also about modeling those behaviors ourselves as educators.
Right.
We need to show students how to disagree respectfully,
Yeah.
how to listen to opposing viewpoints with an open mind, and how to change our own minds when presented with new evidence.
You know, that reminds me of a situation I had last year
Oh, yeah.
with a parent who was vehemently opposed to a book we were reading in class.
Uh-oh.
And I was so caught up
Yeah.
in defending the book and the curriculum that I didn't really stop to listen to her concerns.
It's so easy to get defensive, especially when we feel like our professional judgment is being questioned.
Yeah.
But I think those moments are actually opportunities to practice what we preach.
Yeah.
To model those principles of open-mindedness, empathy, and a willingness to engage in respectful dialogue.
It's true. That's such a good point. It's not just about what we teach, but how we ourselves engage in these discussions.
Exactly. And I think the more we can embody those principles in our own interactions, the more likely we are to create a classroom culture where students feel safe to do the same.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about the big picture philosophy of objective pluralism.
Yes.
But what are some concrete practical strategies that teachers can use to implement this in their classrooms?
There are tons of great ideas out there.
Okay.
One technique Perkins recommends is structured academic controversy.
Okay.
Have you ever used this approach?
I haven't, but I've heard of it. It sounds intriguing.
It involves having students research and present different sides of a controversial issue
Okay.
with clear guidelines for respectful debate.
Okay.
For example, let's say you're teaching a unit on the Civil War.
Right.
Instead of just presenting the facts from a textbook,
Right.
you could have students research and debate the perspectives of abolitionists, Confederate soldiers, plantation owners, and enslaved people.
So instead of avoiding those hot button topics, you're actually encouraging students to dive right in,
Exactly.
but in a structured and supportive environment.
That's the key. By providing structure and clear expectations, you can create a space where students can grapple with complex issues,
Yeah,
develop their critical thinking skills, and practice the art of civil discourse.
I love that. And it aligns so well with the goals of objective pluralism.
Yes.
Valuing diverse viewpoints, seeking evidence, and engaging in reasoned debate.
It really does. And it's a great way to bring history to life.
Yes.
To show students that the past is full of complexities and contradictions, and that there are always multiple perspectives to consider.
You know, that makes me think about the current debates happening around the country about what should be taught in history classes.
It's a hot topic.
It feels like everyone is so focused on pushing their own narrative
Yeah.
that we've lost sight of the importance of helping students develop the critical thinking skills to evaluate different perspectives for themselves.
It's a valid concern, and I think objective pluralism offers a powerful framework for navigating those debates.
Okay.
It's not about indoctrinating students with a particular ideology. It's about equipping them with the tools to analyze information, consider different viewpoints, and form their own conclusions.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
But how do we ensure that students are actually engaging in this kind of critical thinking?
Right.
How do we know they're not just regurgitating the arguments they've been given or simply echoing the opinions of their parents or peers?
That's where good teaching comes in.
Right.
Asking probing questions, challenging students to support their claims with evidence, encouraging them to consider alternative perspectives, facilitating meaningful discussions,
Right.
creating opportunities for reflection.
Right.
All of these strategies can help foster deeper thinking
Yes.
and a more authentic engagement with the material.
I love that emphasis on process.
Yes.
It's not just about arriving at the right answer, but about developing the skills to navigate complex issues, weigh different perspectives, and form informed opinions.
Absolutely. And those are skills that will serve students well, no matter what path they choose in life.
Right.
We're not just preparing them for tests.
Right.
We're preparing them for life in a democracy.
And that's a powerful reminder for all of us as educators.
It is.
We have a responsibility to equip our students with the tools and the mindset
Yeah.
to engage in civil discourse, to embrace complexity,
Right.
and to never stop seeking truth, even when it's challenging.
That's beautifully said. And it makes me think about the real-world examples of schools and educators who are putting these ideas into practice and seeing real results.
Let's hear about it.
It's happening all over the country, and it's making a difference.
Now, that's what I want to hear about. I'm ready for some inspiration. Give me some examples of what success looks like. Let's dive into those real-world stories next. Okay, so let's talk about those real-world successes. What are some examples of objective pluralism in action? And what kind of impact is it having on schools and students?
There are so many inspiring examples. One that comes to mind is a high school in California that was struggling with intense political divisions within the student body. Especially around the 2020 election.
I can only imagine. Teenagers plus social media plus a highly charged political climate. That's a recipe for conflict.
It was a tense environment for sure. But instead of shying away from those divisions, the school decided to lean into them using objective pluralism as a guiding principle. They created a program called Civic Dialogues.
Civic Dialogues.
Where students from across the political spectrum were invited to participate in structured conversations about controversial issues.
So rather than letting those disagreements fester in the hallways or on social media, they created a safe space for students to engage with each other face-to-face.
Exactly. And they didn't just throw them in a room and hope for the best. They trained student facilitators in the principles of active listening, respectful communication, and conflict resolution. They also established clear ground rules for the discussions, emphasizing evidence-based arguments and a focus on understanding different perspectives.
That's so smart. It's like they were giving students the tools and the skills to have those difficult conversations in a productive way.
And the results were remarkable.
Really?
Students reported feeling more connected to their peers, even those with whom they disagreed politically.
That's huge.
They also developed a greater appreciation for the complexity of these issues and a deeper understanding of different viewpoints.
That's amazing. So it sounds like they were not only learning about civic engagement, but also developing essential life skills like empathy, communication, and critical thinking.
Absolutely. And the impact extended beyond the individual students. The school climate as a whole became more respectful and inclusive. There was less bullying and harassment, and students felt more comfortable expressing their opinions without fear of judgment or retaliation.
Wow. That's a powerful testament to the transformative potential of objective pluralism. It's not just a theoretical concept. It can actually make a real difference in the lives of students and the culture of schools.
It really can, and it's not limited to high schools. There are elementary schools using picture books to introduce the concept of perspective taking.
That's great.
There are middle schools incorporating structured debates into their history and social studies curricula. And there are colleges offering courses on civil discourse and the art of constructive disagreement.
It's exciting to see this movement gaining momentum across all levels of education. It feels like we're finally starting to recognize the importance of equipping students with the skills to navigate a world that's increasingly complex and divided.
I agree. And it's not just happening in schools. There are community organizations, nonprofits, and even online platforms dedicated to promoting civil discourse and bridging divides. It feels like there's a growing awareness of the need for these skills and a growing commitment to fostering them.
That's so encouraging to hear. It's easy to get discouraged when you're bombarded with news stories about political polarization and social media outrage. But these examples give me hope that we can create a better future. One where people can disagree respectfully, listen to each other with empathy, and work together to solve problems.
I share your hope. And I think what's most important is that these ideas aren't limited to experts or educators. We can all practice objective pluralism in our daily lives.
In our families, our workplaces, our communities.
Exactly.
Absolutely. It's about being mindful of our own biases. Being willing to listen to perspectives that challenge our own. And engaging in conversations with a spirit of curiosity and a genuine desire to understand. It's not always easy.
It's not.
But it's so worth it.
It is. You know, this whole conversation has been incredibly thought-provoking.
It has.
It's made me realize that objective pluralism isn't just a set of rules or strategies. It's a way of being in the world. It's about approaching life with intellectual humility, open-mindedness, and a commitment to truth-seeking, even when it's uncomfortable.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think it's a powerful message for all of us.
I agree.
Especially as we navigate these challenging times.
So for our listeners who are ready to embrace objective pluralism in their own lives, where should they start?
I think a great first step is to simply become more aware of those 3 great untruths we discussed earlier.
Right.
The idea that hardship makes you weaker, that feelings are always right, and that the world is divided into good and evil. Once you start to recognize those patterns of thinking, you can start to challenge them.
That's a great suggestion. And remember, it's not about suppressing your emotions or pretending that everyone is perfect. It's about developing the critical thinking skills to evaluate your own feelings, to recognize the nuance and complexity in others.
Right.
And to approach disagreements with curiosity rather than judgment.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into objective pluralism. I hope you're leaving feeling inspired, empowered, and ready to embrace the challenges and opportunities of navigating a world full of diverse perspectives.
What we need to do is spend enough time together that we can start to translate our ideas into each other's language and include one another in this community of inquiry. And that is the work of love.